You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
Well, Paul, we're going to be doing something a little bit different this week. Paul? 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 Ah, shit. Alright, so, it turns out that the farm or something, wherever Paul lives, they apparently lost their internet. So, I mean, I figure that the hamster that runs on the little wheel that charges his Wi-Fi must have died. So he's not going to be joining us today, unfortunately. I was rather looking forward to having him in here because, I'll be honest with you, this particular episode is going to be a mailbag episode. This was originally planned to be a Patreon exclusive. You can consider yourself lucky or not that this is actually going to be our actual episode this week because I've got nothing else and I'm running really close to the deadline and Paul's not going to make it. So I got to get something out for you guys. So I put a couple of... I put it out there for the past week, asking the community and our fans, hey, ask a few questions that we'll answer. Or I think we actually have enough to fill an episode. So let's dive right in. Sarah Kelly from the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group asks, what was your first adventure game experience? How old were you? And who introduced it to you? So the answer to this is actually something I have mentioned a few times throughout the show, but I guess I'm not going to assume that everybody has listened to everything so far. We did gain, hopefully, quite a few new listeners over the last few weeks. I'm really hoping. I really, really like to hope that there's some sort of progress being made in terms of our fan base or listener base. The answer that I generally give is it was Police Quest by Sierra. It was actually the very second game that I ever got on my IBM compatible, as we used to call it back then. The first one being another Sierra game, but not an adventure. It was 3D Helicopter Simulator. And I think, my memory for timelines is not really that great. I'm pretty sure Police Quest came first. It was either that or Zork that I got to play on the Commodore 64s in the computer lab of my old elementary school. Now, I actually didn't get very far into Zork because I was never very good at it and I only had limited times to play a couple times a week. So I never finished that. And so I guess I'm just going to give this to Police Quest just to say I was probably about 9 or 10. I think 9. 8 or 9, actually. I think 8 or 9 sounds about right. I honestly couldn't even tell you. Like I said, my mind for timelines have never been very sound. The only other answer I could really give as an alternative to this, for those of you who are tired of hearing me say the same story over and over again, I think if there's one adventure game that predates Police Quest for me, it is the game that is literally called Adventure on the Atari. I know it's not really the kind of adventure game that we think about today when we mention adventure games, but it was a game. It was named Adventure. So there you go. Those are somewhere between those three is my number one. I played Adventure on Atari at a family friend's house. I actually forget who it was. I'm not sure if they were close family friends. I think it just might have been like... I honestly can't remember. I was really young. I barely sentient. I didn't really hit sentience until I was probably about 25. Like I said, the computer lab was where I played Zork, and then Police Quest. I don't know who it was that gave it to us. It was one of my brother's friends. I don't even remember which brother it was. This one day I came home and we had the discs for Police Quest. And that's as far as it goes. That was back in the time where disc copying was very rampant. When one of the neighborhood kids bought a game, that meant the neighborhood had that game. And so I couldn't trace it back to you. I honestly can't, but that's how that got going. Moving on, we have one from Jude Gore, also from the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group. And Jude asks, what's the classic point-and-click game that never got the sequel you really thought it deserved? or another sequel if it already had some? I'm going to answer for Paul here and say he'd probably say Gold Rush if he were here. He would probably also say Space Quest if he were here. If he were here, because he were not here right now. I'm just giving you a hard time, Paul. I know you're listening to this. I actually consider myself very fortunate when it comes to Sierra, because I honestly feel that all of the Sierra adventure games that I liked, the series, I should say, they all ended at either the exact right moment, in the case of like Quest for Glory 5, or they kind of stepped a little too far. By the time Sierra ended, I don't feel that there were any loose ends. I think, if anything, there were a couple of ends that could have been snipped. And some of you may bring the argument in that, hey, at least those games gave people jobs, and I agree with that. That's cool. I'm all for people getting paid to do work. I personally would have rathered that they had been put towards different games is all. But in terms of series, yeah, I don't think any of those really need another sequel. So that brings us to... Well, let's go with Accolade first, because they had like a bunch of adventure games like Altered Destiny and Less Manly. And I didn't really particularly like very many of those, so they can just kind of stop. Forget those guys. I did not play the Curandia series very far. I only got a little bit into the first one. And that brings us to LucasArts. Fate of Atlantis, it was great. Doesn't need a sequel. If there was going to be another Indiana Jones adventure game, cool, but it would be a totally different story, just as every Indiana Jones stories are very, obviously the same character. Obviously there's a little bit of a through line, but they're not really connected. Like, they're pretty standalone. You don't need to continue Atlantis. You don't need to continue Last Crusade. So in terms of a true sequel, they don't need anything. If it ended where it did, which it did, obviously, there's nothing to cry over. Those were great games, and they wrapped up nicely. They don't need anything else. More would be merrier, but they don't need it. Monkey Islands, honestly, I only really played the first one. I know I'm missing out on the second one. I hear some fantastic things about the second one, but I also hear that the series is kind of dragged out a bit. A lot of people these days kind of talk about how there's a missed opportunity of never making a a Star Wars point-and-click adventure. That would have been cool, but that's not a sequel to anything if they did, so can't really say that. Elephant in the Room is Loom, because it was supposed to have a sequel that never happened. And I will say this again, I've said it many times before, I really hope that the sequel does not happen. I don't care how much it was planned. I don't care how much it was not really a direct sequel or whatever. They said it was going to be something else, but in the same universe. No, I don't care. Loom was perfect. Let it stay perfect. It's one game, and that's how it should be. And that's how I want it to always be forever. So, close LucasArts down before they are tempted to make another Loom. So to actually answer your question of which adventure series do I really want to have a sequel, that's actually a really good question. That I actually have to think about a fair amount before I can really come up with an answer. So give me a second. I'm going to pause, and I'll be right back as soon as I've thought of something. Okay, I'm back. Blade Runner. Let's go with Blade Runner. I actually did not really particularly want there to be a sequel to the movie. The sequel to the movie was okay, wasn't bad, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was good, if anything, just I didn't love it the way I loved the original Blade Runner. But I think that any sort of a sequel to the game, the adventure game, would have been great. Whether it's a spin-off, whether it's a direct sequel, I just want more Blade Runner adventure game because that was a wonderful game that I would have loved to have more of. So Jude has a second question as well, and he asks, which classic game had the best soundtrack? I am not nearly an authority on music enough to weigh in on best, per se. Paul might have had some really good insight onto that because he's a musician, but unfortunately, Paul's not here. Paul. But This is all I can really say is my favorite, and that's Quest for Glory 4 Shadows of Darkness. I think that was I like it because it really captures the tone and the mood of the game. It is that, that moodier, darker kind of feel for it. It has a bit more of a rock sound, which as much as I like rock, it's not that I like it because it's rock particularly, but I think that it worked well for the setting. I think it really hit the emotional impact of the game. Like, if you took the music out, I don't think the game would have really affected me as much as it did. I think the music is probably one of the most important parts of that game in terms of like the overall experience. And interestingly enough, it's actually a soundtrack that gets better on subsequent playthroughs because, once I already know stuff that's going to happen, I kind of, I hear the music and it kind of already gives me that sort of feeling of like, oh, now that I know what's going to happen, this music means a little bit more to me, or it affects me a little bit more. It kind of like touches a different nerve with me compared to the first time I heard it going in completely blind. Actually, I kind of even just realized now, I think Quest for Glory 4 really is a game that I think is a lot better generally on repeat playthroughs, more so than the first time. I don't think that's a game that's sort of I wish I could play it for the first time again. No, I think the beauty of Quest for Glory 4 is it gets better each time you play it, and I think the music has a lot to do with that for me personally. So best, I don't know. Favorite, definitely that. Some honorable mentions go to Dune. I think a lot of people kind of agree that Dune had a really great one. Not Dune 2, but the Dune adventure game, kind of whatever. I don't know. It's a really weird kind of game, but it was awesome, and the music was great. Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of classic games that have like amazing games. Like, if you want to really go into classic games, I could even expand that into a lot of the console games. So obviously there's the Marios and the Zeldas. Zelda's particularly awesome. Punch Out, probably my favorite song from the NES era was the Punch Out theme. I guess if I really want to go for a bit of a deep dig, Shantae, more so particularly the Pirate's Curse, which I know is not really aged enough to be a classic, but what's it called? The Scuttletown theme is a fantastic theme, and I'm pretty sure that dates back, if not to all the way back to the Game Boy Color, then at least the Game Boy Advance. I do know it's in the Game Boy Advance version. I forget what that particular entry was called. But I think that that would qualify it as a classic theme. Moving on. So Sean McCauley, again from the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group, asks, what's wrong with people who eat hamburgers rather than cheeseburgers? Maybe they're lactose intolerant. Maybe. If it's just by choice, then the answer is everything. Everything's wrong with them. That's just weird. Why would you do that? Just don't trust anyone who would do such a thing. That's horrible. Stephen Schroeder via Twitter asks, what are the best in development projects to keep an eye on? This is another one which I'm going to be giving a lot of plugs, which I have been giving quite a bit throughout the past year on the show. Number one, obviously, The Crimson Diamond by Julia Minamata. That's been getting some pretty good publicity lately. Julia has been on the show a few times to talk about it at great length. I recommend going back and listening to some of those episodes because there's a lot that she has to say about it, and I cannot possibly sum it all up right here. But take a look. Find her on social media. Follow her project. It's really quite fascinating what she's doing. In a similar vein, Phil Fortier's Cascadia Quest, another throwback to the EGA parser era. Very convincingly Sierra style. Really well done, as far as I can tell from the trailers. So yeah, he's the guy who made the Snail Trek, which you can find for really cheap on Steam. They're very quick, easy, light and fun games just to kill some time with, but very, very worth it. Very rewarding experience. So go check that out. Summer Days at Hero U, you've heard us talk about here quite a bit. They've gotten their funding on Kickstarter. So that's they got the green light to go ahead. So that's kind of like a side story in the Hero U universe, which itself is a continuation in the universe of Gloriana from Quest for Glory. So that's pretty exciting just to see it. It's kind of a bit more it's kind of a bit more hybridized between interactive fiction and adventure games slash kind of I think it's a little too reductive to call it choose your own adventure, because it is going to be a little bit more elaborate than that. It will be a bit more game than just a choose your own adventure or an interactive novel. So it is kind of a lighter game, though. It's kind of just sort of like a stand-in between games. Don't expect anything quite as in-depth as Hero U was, but I think it will be a pretty fun, light experience to tide us over until the next one. And of course, there's Space Venture, made by the two guys. I have all the confidence that'll be pretty awesome when it comes out. From the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook page, Aaron Bowie asks, how much time do you have to actually fully immerse yourself into a game? I find that the older I get, the more sporadic becomes the time I can devote to gaming, and therefore I can never reach that state of complete involvement and flow that typified my gaming experiences in my youth back in the 90s and early 2000s. It just doesn't feel the same, and so I find myself gravitating toward discussion in groups that involve talking about and romanticizing the games of yesteryear rather than playing the games of today. I fully agree. I don't really have a whole lot of time. One of the things that actually comes up quite a bit when Paul and I talk about which episodes to plan forward to is that we've only played so many games back in the day because, back then you really had only one or two games that you put all your attention to. And, over time, we accumulated a fair amount of games that we've played through. But we're starting to run out of games to talk about off of our personal experiences from back then, which is why we're trying to branch a little bit more into like the indie games. That did not work all the best for us. It wasn't so bad. They just don't really get as much interest as more classically themed episodes. So now, as we're running out of classic games that we have played, we keep talking about classic games and indie games that we need to play so that we can talk about it. And that's kind of where it gets a little bit weird because, a lot of these games, it's tough to find the time to play through these because, a lot of the time that I would have spent on playing games, I am now spending on making a podcast to talk about the games. So I don't really have time to really sink my teeth into a lot of these ones. That's why we favor a lot of the shorter games. I was able to get a really good playthrough out of the Red Strings Club that we talked about a couple weeks ago. That was a really good one. I got one really good immersive experience out of that. I really wish I was a little bit younger to play that one so that I could have gone through multiple times and really explored all the different things in that world that I could have found if I had made different choices. But unfortunately, being the age that I am, I was just one and done and I have to move on. So it's tough. I don't really, I think having grown up with a lot of these games, I am actually pretty good at being able to project back and kind of figuring how well I would have taken to it if I had played it back then. I mentioned in the episode about EchoQuest that, it was, I could imagine myself having a lot of fun with it back in the day. And a lot of people who did play it back in the day kind of back up that, it was great. And I could tell that even though I myself didn't really have the greatest time playing it now, I could just kind of contextualize it in my head saying, well, back then I would have really liked this. Via Twitter, Kennerly D, he is in fact the guy who does the majority of our memes for our Facebook page. So if you enjoy some of those, that's actually Daniel who's making those for us all to enjoy. And he asks, since we're closing out the 2010s, what are some games that came out in the last decade that were your favorites? What titles will we look back upon fondly and consider them to be classics someday? Well, for one thing, the last 10 years had some games which were just already instant classics, let alone in about 20 years from now. We had The Last of Us. I just haven't played that one, but I hear that by all accounts that that's just a fantastic game. A lot of the Legend of Zeldas that came out, Breath of the Wild particularly. Red Dead Redemption, I'm sure will be remembered as a classic. I didn't really quite care for that one myself, but I guarantee you that's going to be a classic. Stardew Valley, Destiny, and Skyrim, and those are all fantastic games. In terms of favorites, I mean, I spent a lot of time on various Pokemon games, but those are already classics. Regardless what generation they come out, they all have the same pedigree, and they're all considered lumped together. Same with Monster Hunter. You can't really separate them individually. They're all just Monster Hunter. Each game is just Monster Hunter, and it's kind of already a classic because it came out quite some time ago in its first iteration. So, but that's I spent a lot of time on that. Portal. Or at least Portal 2 came out within the 2010s. That's a fantastic game. That's a classic waiting to be. Well, not even. It is a classic. What am I saying? That's a total classic. I believe a lot of the Mass Effect series actually came out. I know it started earlier with Mass Effect 1. Actually, let me just find out when Mass Effect 2 came out. If that came out within the last 10 years. It actually just makes the cut. Mass Effect 2 came out January 26th, 2010. So that will definitely, even if people still harbor enough resentment towards the ending of Mass Effect 3 to not really want to consider that a classic, I still will, but, for those people who don't, Mass Effect 2, still within the last 10 years, that's a classic. That's an awesome game. A lot of people agree that's the best in the series. Whether or not you agree or disagree, that'll definitely be looked upon as a classic. So, I know that wasn't really the most creative of lists. That was just kind of going with a lot of the low-hanging fruit, but they're low-hanging fruit for a reason, because all of those are awesome games. And those are all games that we're going to be remembering. Whether you were adults or kids when you played it, people are going to be talking about all of those games 20 years from now. Okay, so that leaves us with one more post that involves a lot of questions. I've been kind of deliberately saving this towards the end just because this is a whole bunch of questions from a good friend of mine, Anna Vigu. You've heard her on here before a few episodes back. We talked about Leisure Suit Larry. It's a great episode. I really recommend you going back to it just to because she was a great guest and a good friend of mine. And she asks the following questions, which I'll answer in turn. Question 1, where do you see the podcast going in 2020? Semantically speaking, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be right here. That being said, we do have a couple of ideas, or at least I have a couple of ideas I'm kind of throwing around. It's very, I don't really want to say it right now just because there's a good chance they might not actually happen, but we are always trying to think of ways to make the show a little bit better or to add a new segment. In terms of where the podcast is going, I think I'm probably going to focus a little bit more on trying to get some more people for interviews because people really respond well to those. All of our highest rated episodes are the ones where we've interviewed people. Julia Minamata in episode 1 is still our reigning number 1 most listened to at the time of recording. Lori and Corey Cole's interview is number 2. The Richard Garriott episode just been skyrocketing. I'm pretty sure I'm sure that one's probably at number 3 right now. Our interview with Sean Mills when he was talking about his upcoming book about Sierra, that did really well. So people respond really well to our interview episodes. So I think as much as we're not going to reduce the amount of variety in the episodes moving forward, I think people do tend to like when we interview people more. So we'll probably try to bring a little bit more of that to the table in 2020. And speaking of which, the next question is, are there any guests you have your eye on for the next year? Yes and no. I mean, we've been trying to get Bruce Bernisi back on the show. And actually, this episode was supposed to be the next interview with Bruce, but things didn't work out quite the way we had planned them. So whether or not we get Bruce in before the end of the year or the next year, we're going to have to figure that one out. So he might not be... I'm sure we'll have him in 2020 again as well. Whether or not we get him on before the end of the year. You'll be hearing from him soon, one way or another. I've been trying to get Stephen Alexander of Infamous Quests on here because we had Sean Mills, who was also of Infamous Quests, although we had Sean on for a different purpose. Stephen Alexander has also been working on Frogsheen. We've actually been in talk for months with him now, trying to get him on, and unfortunately things kind of, it's our fault. We keep kind of putting it off just because, I always wanted to finish Quest for Infamy before having him on the show, so I invited him like a long time ago, and I still haven't actually finished the game, so I totally accidentally keep postponing and just not getting around. So I think probably in the new year sometime I'll get him on. There'll be a lot to talk about in terms of his past, doing the Sierra remakes, doing his own original games, and then his upcoming game. Yeah, so we'll get him on here hopefully ASAP. There are a few bigger names that I have on my sites. I don't really want to jinx anything by naming them out right now because I'm not actually in contact with any of them yet. I do have people that I have my sights on. I'm not a superstitious person, but I don't like saying things before I can guarantee that they're in place. Are you guys going to do more water cooler episodes soon? Good question. One of the, I guess kind of a continuation from the guests that were booked. There is, one of our listeners has approached us to be on the show, and we would definitely love to have him. So it would probably be more of a water cooler episode, if we do have him on. But again, the opportunity hasn't arisen yet, but we are working very hard to get him on ASAP, probably in the new year, hopefully even before the new year, but we'll see where that goes. The next question is, are you guys going to have the Coles on again? Do you think you would ever interview them separately? Do you think they ever even do interviews separately? Are we going to have the Coles on again? The short answer, and if you take nothing else away from any of this, the short answer is I would love to have them back. It was a great episode we had with them. They're great pleasure to talk to. All they have to do is ask, and they're in. Don't know when that would be, but definitely they're always welcome. The longer answer to that, however, is I'm not sure at this point what I would really have to talk to them about. I know that they have Summer Days in the works coming up, but they already do their own streaming, and they already answer a lot of fan questions just on Facebook. Like, all you have to do is ask them and they'll answer for you. So I don't really know what more I can bring now that I've already had them on and talked to them at length about Quest for Glory and Hero U and that sort of thing. Probably definitely have them on once Summer Days releases. I don't know if that's 2020 or 2021 or when that's going to come out, but honestly, they do really frequent and regular streams. I kind of feel like if I were to have them on the show to talk about that, it would kind of divide the audience a little bit, because I want to encourage people to tune into their stream rather than hear them talk about what they would have talked about there over here. That got really confusing. I apologize, but yeah, short answer is if they want to be on, I would love to have them on. At the moment, I don't really know what I would say to them because I am in frequent contact with them. I talk to them quite a bit. I'm sure I could get them on, but they already, like I said, they already answer so many questions. They've already been on the show to answer the questions that we did have, and they already do their own streams where they answer people's questions. So yeah, I'd love to have them on, but I don't know what I would say. Would we ever interview them separately? Sure, why not? I don't know if that's something they would want to do or not, but if they do want to, that'd be cool. I'd like to hear more from Lori. Corey can always carry an entire episode, so they would both be pretty awesome in their own different ways. Do they do interviews separately? I don't know. I've never seen them do interviews separately. Actually, wait, Lori did an interview on, what's that other show called? Lori was on Level with Her with Liana Kersner. So yeah, they have that's at least one time where Lori has been interviewed separately. So it is possible. It is possible, and I'm open to any way I can talk to the Coles. I'm really not picky. The Coles, they're my heroes. I love them, both of them, both together, each individually. They're always welcome on, no matter what. Are we going to have more Richard Garriott? I would love to. I could probably talk for a day with Richard Garriott. His stories are amazing. I love it. And he was probably one of the easiest people for me to talk to, just because I already had so many questions I've been wanting to ask him for years. And yeah, I really had to restrain myself when interviewing him last time, just because I didn't really want to cover too much ground that had already been covered in previous interviews and in his book, Explore Create. There was a little bit of retreading, just because, some stories were definitely worth it. And I did kind of call him out on a couple of things that he really had every right to explain. But yeah, I would love to have him back on anytime, any day of the week. Honestly, he was fantastic guest. I loved having him on. That's one of my favorite interviews that I could have done. Because again, Richard Garriott's my hero, and I'm very, I have still so many questions I could be asking him. If time were not an issue, I could talk to him for like a week straight. Moving on. I really like it when you guys feature a classic adventure game. Do you guys think you would ever do listener's choice episodes? We from quite a few months ago, we were supposed to cover Heart of China, and we never really got around to, because it really is kind of hard to find the time to finish a game and to really get into it, really be able to get comfortable enough to talk about it. I would say that we would definitely listen quite heavily to Patreon supporters. If our Patreon supporters were to recommend a game, we would definitely give that a pretty high consideration. Not many people talk to us, is the thing. So that's something that I would really like to try to increase moving forward, is I want people to talk to us more. I know I don't really check my Facebook messages anymore. That's why I try to encourage people to, at the end of every show, we say, you can reach out to us on Twitter. You can reach out to us if you're a Patreon supporter. You can email us. We have an email, Facebook group, Facebook page, just a whole bunch of ways to contact us. A lot of people have given us praise and say they enjoy the show. Not many people really reach out to us with requests. We would totally consider that. Again, a lot of it depends on timing, particularly how much time we have to actually give into this. We still owe everybody a Heart of China episode, and I don't know when that's going to happen. So take everything I just said with a grain of salt. Our ears are open, but our calendars might not be quite as open. Would you guys ever do a YouTube live or Twitch broadcast? Something with some video? Well, not officially for the show, in the sense that these shows are really heavily edited. You will not believe, even something as straightforward as this episode where I'm just reading and answering, there's going to be so many cuts, because I've stumbled over my lines so many times. There's so many times I have to stop and think. There's going to be so many times I'm going to have to edit out my little lip smacking noises that I make in between lines. There's a lot of stuff that I cut out. There's a lot of stuff that I leave on the editing floor. And it's really easy to do when there's audio, but when you do video, you have to match that up, and it's going to be very obvious where all the cuts are. So yeah, video is probably not something I'm going to do, but I am throwing the audio episodes up on YouTube so people can, so we can hopefully reach some of the audience that we haven't really been reaching before. There's a certain convenience to YouTube versus our actual webpage or any of the streaming apps. But I'm only really going to be putting up some of our more popular episodes onto YouTube, and I'm going to put our full catalog on there, just a few of the good ones, just the ones that we particularly like, or some of the ones that we find maybe a little bit more attention grabbing, just the ones that we think might help to draw people more towards the show. I do a little bit of Twitch every now and then. I haven't done one in a very long time, but it's very casual. It's very unofficial, just sort of, chilling out for an hour here or there, and whoever's there is there. But I guess one of the plans I really want to do in 2020 is I actually do want to do a little fundraiser benefits going towards Stephen Alexander, who is going through some health complications right now. And the medical bills are stacking. Some of our friends over at the YouTube Adventure Roundtable have already done a fundraiser. Possibly more. I'm aware of one that they did fairly recently. And they also did it to benefit Stephen Alexander. They raised a bit of money. Obviously not enough to cover everything they needed to cover, but they definitely helped, and it was a good time, and it raised a lot of good awareness. So I hope to get enough ducks in a row that we can do that sometime in the next year. I would like to do my part and everything I can to try to help Stephen Alexander. He's a really good guy. He's really, really a force for good in the community. And that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of planning for the future. So I think that does wrap up the questions that we have for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode at least a little bit. Again, I apologize that this wasn't exactly the episode that I wanted to bring to you just yet. This was going to be more of a Patreon exclusive, but it's the episode that I'm actually able to get out for everybody this week, given the circumstances. The clock's ticking on deadline, and I got to get something out the door. So if you have any other questions that we weren't able to address here today, feel free to reach out to us. We're on Facebook. We have a page. We have a group. We're on Patreon if you want to support the show. You can find us on Twitter at the CG Guild. You can find us on Instagram at CGG Podcast. And you can send us emails, whether they be fan mail or hate mail. I don't care. Just send us something. We're at mail@classicgamersguild.com. And until next time, and since Paul isn't here, don't do murders, because I am grammatically correct.